Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Storytime from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes from the Algonquin people of North America, and is a story about a young girl who could see things that other people couldn't. This is the story of the rough-faced girl. Once, long ago, on the shores of Lake Ontario, there was a village. And in this village, at one end, there was a big wigwam. It was a very nice wigwam, and it was covered all over with skins. And on the skins were carved in and painted figures of people and animals and the sun and the moon and the stars and different plants and all sorts of things. For you see, in that wigwam lived the invisible being. No one had ever seen the invisible being except his sister who lived with him. And the invisible being was said to be very powerful and very rich and very handsome. And many of the women of the village wanted to marry the invisible being. But every time when they would come to his sister and ask, she would tell them, "Only the person who has seen my brother, the invisible being, can marry my brother, the invisible being." Well, also living in that village, at the other end, in a very small wigwam, was a poor old man and his 3 daughters. Now, the 2 older daughters, they were beautiful, yes, but they were rather cold and hard-hearted, and they liked to pick on their little sister. In fact, they made the youngest sister sit very close to the fire and feed the branches into it so that it would stay lit. And when she would put the branches in and they would pop and they would break, the sparks would fly out from the fire and they would hit her on the hands and the arms and the face, and they burned her. And they caused her hands and her arms to become very rough and scarred, and her face was rough and scarred, and sometimes the sparks even landed in her hair, and so her hair was very charred and ragged, and it didn't look very nice. Well, one day the 2 oldest daughters went to their father and they demanded, "Father, give us beautiful new buckskin dresses and beaded moccasins and beads and shells for necklaces. We are going to marry the invisible being." And so even though it took almost everything he had, their father got them beautiful new buckskin dresses and beautiful beaded moccasins and beautiful bead and shell necklaces, the best he could find. Well, the 2 girls got themselves all dressed up in their finery. They combed out their hair very fine, and they began to walk through the village. Well, as they walked, people heard them going, and they came and looked out of their wigwams to see who was going down the street towards the invisible being's wigwam. And they saw the 2 girls, and they said, "Oh, look at those 2 girls. See how beautiful they are. Oh, surely they will marry the invisible being. They are so beautiful." If the 2 girls had been proud and hard-hearted before, they were twice as proud and hard-hearted as they heard all of that praise, and their noses got higher and higher into the air as they strutted down the street in all their finery toward the invisible being's wigwam. When they arrived, the invisible being's sister was sitting in front of the wigwam, waiting for them. And she looked at them and she said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "We are here to marry the invisible being." And she said, "Ah, but if you are here to marry my brother, you must have seen my brother. Have you seen my brother?" And they said, "Well, of course we have. Look at us. We're so beautiful and our clothing is so beautiful. Of of course we must have seen the great invisible being." "Well then," said his sister, "if you have seen my brother, then you would be able to tell me, what is his bow made of?" And suddenly her voice was quick as lightning and loud as thunder. His bow?" the sisters said, quite startled. They turned and they whispered to each other, "What should we say his bow is made of? What is it? Let's say the oak tree. Yes, the mighty oak tree." "No, no," said the invisible being's sister. "You say that you have seen my brother. Then tell me, what is the runner of his sled made of?" The runner of his sled? The runner of his sled? The green willow tree. Yes, the green willow tree. "No, you have not seen my brother. Go home." "But we have seen the invisible being," the girls insisted, even though it was quite clear that the sister of the invisible being could see right through their lies. "We have seen him. Stop testing us with these silly questions. We have seen the invisible being." "Very well," said the sister of the invisible being, and she stood up and took the two girls into the wigwam with her, all the way to the back of the wigwam, and she let them sit there in the seat where guests would normally sit. And she told them to wait, and then she left. And a little while later, they heard footsteps coming down the path. And then the door of the wigwam lifted up, but they could not see anything. Then they realized they could hear someone breathing, but they still could not see anything. And then suddenly, a bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down in a place. But they still could not see anything else. And although they waited and watched with their eyes wide all night long, they never saw anything else. And in the morning, they had to go home ashamed. Well, the next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father and she said, "Please, Father, may I have a new buckskin dress and moccasins and perhaps some beads for a necklace? For you see, everywhere I look, I see the face of the invisible being and I wish to marry him." Her father sighed and he said to her, "My daughter, I am sorry. I do not have any beads to give you, just a few broken shells. And I do not have a buckskin dress for you. And the only moccasins I have are my old pair from last year, and they are so cracked and worn and far too big for your feet." "Well, that's all right, Father," she said. "I will take whatever you can give me and I will use it." And so her father gave her the broken shells and the old worn-out moccasins. And the rough-faced girl went down to the edge of the river, or the lake, and she soaked the moccasins in the lake until they were very soft. And then she molded them to her feet. But even though she molded them as best she could, they were still far too big, and they made a flap, flap, flap sound as she walked about in them. And then she went and she found some dried reeds, and she wove the broken shells onto the dried reeds to make a necklace. And then she went to the forest and she peeled the birch bark off of the dead trees, and she made herself leggings and a dress and a hat out of the birch bark. And on the birch bark she carved with a sharp piece of bone figures of trees and animals and people and the sky, the moon and the sun and the stars. And then she put on that dress and the hat and the leggings, and she put on her big moccasins and her necklace made of reeds and broken shells, and she began to walk through the village towards the invisible being's wigwam. Well, as she was walking, The flap, flap, flap of her moccasins that were far too big drew people's attention, and they came and they peered out of their wigwams, and they started to point, and they started to laugh. Look at that ugly girl! What is she wearing? She looks so funny. Hey, ugly girl, don't worry about it. You'll never be able to marry the invisible being. You're better off just going home now, honey. But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. And so she continued walking, and she ignored the people and all they were saying. And she just looked about her at the beauty of the day. The sun was setting in the sky, and everything was golden and orange and red, and it was so beautiful. And she alone, of all the people in that village, could see in the beauty of the world about her the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. At last she got to the wigwam down near the lake edge, just as the sun was setting behind the hills and the stars were beginning to sprinkle the sky. And there, standing by the water, was the sister of the invisible being. Now, the invisible being's sister had a skill that most people do not have. For when most people look at someone, they see their outside, they see their clothes they're wearing, or what their face looks like, or what their body looks like, and they see a beauty there, or they don't. But the invisible being's sister did not pay attention to what someone looked like on the outside. She could look into your eyes and see straight through to your heart. And so when she took one look at the rough-faced girl, she could see that while she did not look very pretty on the outside, and her clothing was certainly very strange, inside she had a beautiful, kind, and gentle heart. And so she greeted her kindly, and she said, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" And she said, "I would like to marry the invisible being, please." And the sister of the invisible being said, "Ah, but if you wish to marry my brother, the invisible being, then you must have seen him. Have you seen him?" "Yes," said the rough-faced girl. "Well then, if you have seen my brother, what is his bow made of?" "His bow?" said the rough-faced girl. "Why, it is the curve of the great rainbow." "Ah," said the invisible being's sister, "and tell me then, if you have seen my brother, what is the runner of his sled made of?" And the rough-faced girl looked up to the sky and she said, It is the spirit road, the Milky Way that stretches across the sky." "Ah," said the invisible being's sister, "you have seen my brother. Come with me, my sister." And she took her into the wigwam, and she sat her down near the door in the place where the wife sits. And together they waited. And after a little while they heard footsteps on the path. And then the door of the wigwam opened up, and in stepped the invisible being. And he saw the girl sitting there, and he said, "Ah, my sister, have we been found out at last?" And she said, "We have." And he said, "Oh, but my sister, she is beautiful." "Indeed she is," said the invisible being's sister. And then she went, and from a place where they had been kept very carefully, she brought out the finest of buckskin robes and the most beautiful beaded moccasins. And she gave them to the rough-faced girl, and she said, "Now, my sister, go and bathe in the lake and put these on." And so the rough-faced girl went down to the lake, and she waded in, and she bathed herself. And lo and behold, as she washed in the lake water, all of the scars that she had from all of those years of being burned by the fire disappeared. And her skin was once more smooth and soft. Her hair was not ragged and full of ashes anymore. No, now it was long and silky and glossy as a raven's wing. And now everyone could see what the invisible being and his sister had seen right away, that the girl was indeed very beautiful. And the invisible being and his sister took the gruff-faced girl into their home, and she became the invisible being's wife. They were married, and they lived together in great gladness, and they were never parted. And that is the story of the rough-faced girl from the Algonquin people of North America. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will come back again on Friday at 3 p.m. Central Time. We will have another story for you from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.